Welcome to IVF This, Episode 15, Emotional Cushioning. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. I'm a mother to two beautiful and feral boys. I'm married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hey friends, welcome back to the podcast. Some of you might know that I live in Austin, Texas, and we've had kind of an interesting week over the last couple of weeks. We had what we're affectionately calling either snowpocalypse or snowmageddon. Texas is really good at handling really hot days. You know, in the summer, it's not uncommon to go over 90 days, over 90 degrees. Several days of the summer, you get into the hundreds. But when Mother Nature decides to throw us a blizzard with several days in a row of sub-zero temperatures, we're not that equipped to handle it. So I got messages from many people on Instagram, text messages from friends and family who live all over the country, outside of the United States. I have a wonderful client in Australia who heard about it. Your prayers and warm wishes were greatly appreciated. We're absolutely fine. We lost power for about 4 days, but me and my guys are totally fine. We're back. Obviously, I have electricity again because I'm here recording today. Another fun thing that I wanted to share with you guys is I have been exploring the new app Clubhouse. You can find me on Clubhouse at IVF This Coaching. I try and keep all my handles the same so you guys can find me. And Clubhouse is this really cool app that's an audio only, like group chat rooms, basically. And I think currently it's only available if you are an iPhone user. I think I saw a news update, something that they're working with developers on an Android version as well. So more on that to come. But there are so many fertility and infertility and IVF members in the Clubhouse space already. There is an IVF support group that's run on Tuesdays, I believe, by another fertility coach, Kristen Dillensnyder. And as of today, when you're listening, I am launching a Monday group on Clubhouse for basically Ask a Coach. So it's an hour-long open coaching call where you can come in, any questions you have about infertility, IVF, mindset. I'm going to bring in some other moderators to help me, other areas of the infertility space, nutrition, meditation, acupuncture. I really want to bring in an opportunity for kind of an all-comers question. And so that is going to start very soon. So if you are on Clubhouse, follow me at IVF This Coaching. If you are an iPhone user and you're not yet on Clubhouse, reach out to me. I have a few invites that I can send you. You can DM me on Instagram. Let me know your handle and I can invite you. But Clubhouse is really an incredible opportunity. Another group that is phenomenal is on Clubhouse is Daughters of Hannah. And it is co-facilitated by some extraordinary women who have really devoted themselves to advocacy and awareness around infertility and IVF and that entire space. And so if you haven't checked it out, absolutely check it out. There is so much information, and not just for infertility and IVF. It's kind of a rapidly growing space. So that is something that I've really enjoyed getting to kind of experience and experiment with over the last few weeks. And so if you're on there, hop into one of those rooms that you see. Come join me on my Monday Ask a Coach calls. If you're not, but you're interested, reach out to me. I can give you an invite. But you Android users, wait patiently. Your turn is coming, I promise. All right, so that was a few minutes. So I think we can probably get into today's topic, which is emotional cushioning. Now, emotional cushioning is not like a mainstream concept or something that's really even discussed. So before we get into the weeds about what it is, I want to start off with a few scenarios. So I want you to see if any of this resonates or sounds like you. right? Okay, so you've been trying to conceive for a few years, and with each passing cycle, you find yourself almost apathetic about it. Or maybe you've gone through a failed IVF cycle, maybe it was canceled, or you had a fresh transfer that didn't result in a pregnancy, or now you're planning another cycle, or you didn't get any blastocytes, right? It doesn't necessarily matter what the circumstances, but you're only feeling dread about your upcoming cycle, right? And you kind of find this to be confusing because you obviously desperately want children with every fiber of your being, but yet you feel almost numb and withdrawn from the process. Maybe you've experienced a miscarriage before and you're pregnant now, and you find yourself lacking excitement about your new pregnancy, maybe like distancing yourself and your heart from the pregnancy. I mean, you know you're pregnant, right? You're not in denial about it, but you tell yourself that you should be excited. You know, I love our shoulds, that you should be excited about it, but you just aren't. It's that feeling of constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. You try not to get too excited about things. Does it sound familiar? Right? This is emotional cushioning. There's a name for everything, right? Emotional cushioning is an unconscious defense mechanism that is used to emotionally distance yourself when you're trying to conceive, after a loss. It can really be any time in your journey. And it's used to avoid an emotional attachment so that you can kind of safeguard your emotions. It's a way to protect yourself. So many of us experience this overwhelming sense of anxiety and the gut-wrenching vulnerability that is kind of required for IVF and infertility. And we use this as a defense mechanism, as a way to not get ahead of ourselves, right? Don't you love that phrase? Or the phrase, don't count your chickens before they hatch. Now, I'm from Texas, so that might not be a colloquial that everyone uses, but I heard that a lot growing up. The person who actually coined those terms were kind of unknowingly employing emotional cushioning. Worse yet, sometimes we're in the midst of emotional cushioning, right? And we're trying to temper our expectations. And our friends and families and coworkers, and maybe even our partner is telling us things like, just enjoy this part, or don't be so negative, or I thought this was what you wanted. When people say these things to us, we then internalize as those are the things that we should be doing and we're not. So great, right? Again, we're failing at something. I had a client tell me that when people would tell her to stop being so negative, she had experienced a miscarriage and she was pregnant again. And all she could think about was how every time she went to the doctor, they wouldn't be able to find a heartbeat, right? It's a pretty normal and natural reaction, right? There's nothing wrong with her thinking that, but everyone would tell her to stop being so negative. And so she made that mean that she didn't want her baby, or that people maybe thought that she didn't want her baby, and that she was already failing as a mother. For real, that is what she made that mean for her, that she was already failing at being a mother. Of course, it wasn't true. None of it, not at all, not even a teeny bit. But when we don't talk about these types of things, these types of concepts, it makes it very easy to cast blame on ourselves. It makes it very easy to perpetuate that story of being worthless or failing. I think I've talked about the term cognitive dissonance before, but if you're unfamiliar, it's essentially holding contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values simultaneously. So the cognitive dissonance with emotional cushioning is that you desperately want a baby. You want the cycle to be successful. You want good blastocytes. And if you're doing testing, you want chromosomally normal embryos. And you want the transfer to be successful. And you want to have healthy, full-term pregnancy. But you're also trying to not get your hopes up. You also might be caught in the thought loop of all the things that can go wrong, or telling yourself that it probably won't work, or something similar to that. Now, cognitive dissonance isn't a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing that our brain does. The same for emotional cushioning. It's just something that our brain does to protect us. Your brain isn't actually working against you. It just can't tell the difference between expecting to be attacked by a tiger thousands of years ago and your upcoming egg retrieval, or being newly pregnant after a loss. So it relies on habits. A coach I absolutely adore once said that habits are like your brain's user's guide, like a book that your brain turns to when it's not sure what to do, when it's trying to process something. And I think that's such a great description. Since this is a habit or a book that your brain developed thousands of years ago, it's going to happen. When you're waiting for your day 5 blast report and your brain is telling you, well, we can hope for a few good quality blasts, but last time, you could fill in the blank with just about anything here, right? But as we become more aware of what it is and when it's happening, the more you can actually steer your brain away from the spiral. Emotional cushioning is just a habit. It is nothing to beat the crap out of yourself for. It's just something to be aware of. That's why it's so important to know about it. I feel like I'm one of those old NBC public service announcements, like the more you know. Man, I'd totally forgotten about those until just now. Anyway, you know me. I love, love, love awareness. We can't fix what we don't see. And if we don't know why we're doing something like emotional cushioning, the more apt we are to beat the shit out of ourselves with all of the I shoulds, I shouldn'ts, I have to's, basically all the things that we tell ourselves we need to do. All the ways that we're ridiculously hard on ourselves. So that's why it's so important to talk about these things, to better understand what our brains do and why. When we understand that, we don't have to argue with our brains. We don't have to fight it. We know it's not the enemy. Our brains are designed and have evolved to think negatively. It was a skill that evolved over thousands of years. As we evolved as a species, the humans that really leaned into that negativity were the ones that anticipated attacks or remembered which berries were poison and which weren't. The ones that expected the worst stayed alive. But we don't have those same kinds of external threats now that we did thousands of years ago, even 300 years ago. What was necessary as a function of survival now contributes to a huge amount of suffering. But since this is how we've evolved, it's a deeply ingrained habit in our brains. So creating awareness around these things really clears the way to start catching on to it and interrupting it. So I want you to think about this one phrase, right? Hope for the best, plan for the worst. It seems so true, right? If you expect the worst, it won't be so bad. It's kind of a reasonable belief to carry, right? For some of us, it makes like logical sense, but it only makes logical sense because we've heard it a million freaking times and it's been cemented into our brains. There's no real science behind this idea. In fact, the first known usage of a phrase kind of in that vein was in 46 BC by a Roman statesman and lawyer named Cicero. I know this isn't like common knowledge, and I only know it because during my undergrad, I studied Latin. And yes, you heard that right. I spent 2 years in college and God knows how much money learning a dead language, but I digress. In some of his writings, Cicero wrote to a friend saying, "You must hope for the best." And when I remembered that, I did a little bit more research because I kind of found it interesting. And the first known use of the full expression, plan for the best but prepare for the worst, was from the English play The Tragedy of Gorboduc. I'm probably butchering that, but it was written in 1561. What? 460 years ago. And it was part of literature, a play. But it was catchy and believable, so it stuck around and in our cultural vernacular. And here we are today, still spewing it like it's gospel. I'm getting a little riled up here, guys. Anyway, this doesn't just come up around infertility and IVF, mind you. This is something that we do in so many areas of our lives. How many of us have had our bosses come to us and say, "Hey, can you come to our office?" And your stomach completely drops to the floor and you're sweating, and the first image in your mind is that you're about to be walked out of the building holding a box of your personal belongings. Or when your partner has said, "Hey, we need to talk," and you just want to come out of your skin because you're so anxious. Yeah, probably all of us at some point. Okay, that's all part of emotional cushioning. You're planning and expecting the worst. Okay, so we know what it is and we know why it happens, but here's the killer. It doesn't work. If you anticipate something bad and then it happens, does it hurt any less? Shit, no. It still hurts the same. Planning for the worst thing to happen doesn't save you from any pain. It doesn't lessen the severity of the pain or decrease the amount of time you experience the pain, but you've also hurt for a longer period of time because you spent time anticipating the worst, and that doesn't feel good. Not only that, as time goes on and you practice that thought and you practice that habit, the less and less you actually hope for the best. Instead, your default then becomes to just expect the worst. And then you stay stuck in that habituated thought pattern and end up living in a perpetual feeling of anxiety. Or, well, I guess the best way to put it is just you keep feeling like shit. You stay stuck. So, all right, let's get unstuck from some shit, right? Let's go. Okay, so I've got 4 steps here that will help you steer your brain away from this. All right, here we go. First one. I bet you guys can guess what the first one is, right? Compassion, compassion, compassion. I was in a Clubhouse room earlier this week with a woman who said she prefers to use the word grace, and I think that is such a beautiful word. I think compassion and grace are the same thing, and she also mentioned that. So giving yourself grace and compassion, oh my God, that is the key to everything. When we are emotionally cushioning, it is so easy to turn it against ourselves and make it mean we are not worthy of whatever it is that we want, or that we're a terrible person, or that we're a piece of shit because we're always negative. If you are emotionally cushioning, it is totally normal. You are not defective. It's not that you can never experience anything joyful. Not at all. All that it means is that your brain is doing what it knows to do, like it's referring to that user manual of how it evolved over thousands of years and is trying to protect you. It's not a problem that you're doing it. Okay, compassion, compassion, compassion. I might just record that on a loop and have it for every single episode. All right, number 2, find neutral thoughts. So this might be the first time I've ever really talked about neutral thoughts, but what I mean is find a thought that is not positive or negative, something that you can't really argue. By taking your thoughts to a neutral place, you get to avoid the mental tug of war between, I want this, but it probably won't happen. I hope for this, but it's not going to work, right? We don't want to make our thoughts all rainbows and daisies and sunshine coming out of our ass. That's not helpful either. Blind optimism can be just as damaging as constant pessimism. So we want to take out the judgment and the drama from the thought to make it neutral. Something like, I really want this to work, and I can plan for all the possible outcomes of this situation. Now, it doesn't have to be something robotic like that. Really, anything will work for you if you try it on and you don't really feel anything, right? You can't argue with it. But when you allow your brain to go to the worst, well, all of a sudden you're going to be picturing the fertility clinic's cryo storage system where you have all of your embryos on ice, having a sudden and massive power failure or a huge fire, and they lose all your embryos. That may or may not have been a random thought that I had at one time. Full disclosure, that was me. But it's like that meme that's the conversation between you and your anxiety where you say, what's the worst that can happen? And your anxiety responds with, well, I'm glad you asked. If you give your brain that kind of leeway, then it is going to use it. It is going to come up with some crazy ass, outrageous, extraordinary scenarios that will feel like real possibilities in your brain. So by taking yourself to a neutral thought, you can use that to steer your brain away from those scenarios and back to what's actually happening. Number 3, paper thinking. I love this term for journaling. For some reason, many people are kind of resistant to journaling or to journaling on a regular basis. And some of us have kind of perfectionistic tendencies and don't do it because we aren't sure if we'll be doing it right, or we don't know where to start, or we haven't found the perfect journal, or we don't want to feel like it's a Dear Diary sort of thing. So that's why I kind of prefer the term paper thinking, because that's literally what you're doing. You are putting on paper the sentences that are in your brain. Now, I've had other kind of kickback like I have terrible handwriting or I type faster than I write, but that's the point. Paper thinking requires you to slow down. To express yourself by writing is a slower process. Your brain wants you to stay all hyped up when it's creating these worst case scenarios. It wants to stay in that spin cycle because you don't do anything. Your brain, your primitive brain, only has 3 motivators: safety, efficiency, and pleasure/comfort. That's what's called the motivational triad. When you stay stuck in a thought loop, your brain just keeps throwing out doomsday stuff, and you don't actually do anything but worry. And worry is completely unproductive. It doesn't require anything of you. I have an upcoming podcast episode on worry, and it's called The Worry Bin, and that'll come out in a few weeks, and that'll help fully flesh out that idea. But for now, taking the time to write it down gets it out of your brain. When it's in our brain, it seems bigger and more important and heavier than it actually is. Even if at the top of the page, you just write down, what am I worried about, right? And list the things. Or what am I afraid of? And just let it all come out. Now, some people might think, oh, I don't want to bring that stuff to light. Like, I don't even want to think about those things. But trust me, you are already thinking about them. The worst thing that can happen is that you write down on paper the thing that you're already thinking. The best thing that can happen is that once you read it, once it's out of your head, it doesn't seem as big. It doesn't seem as scary. And that leads me in a perfect transition to number 4, equal airtime. Give equal airtime to the things that are scaring you and to the amazing things that can happen. By design, we tend to think more negatively, so that's what gets the bulk of the airtime. It's called the negativity bias. That's why the doomsday worst case scenario comes up so easily for us and stays so long. When you give equal airtime to the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, you are, number 1, actually acknowledging the worst case scenario. Most of us get some semblance of the worst case scenario and then spend the rest of the time resisting the thought, right? We push it away, we try to distract ourselves, we try to avoid it. But if we actually acknowledge it, if we don't fight or argue with it, it doesn't have the same power over us. And then number 2, you get the joy of allowing yourself to feel the love, excitement, contentment, whatever it is that you've kind of forbidden yourself from experiencing. Okay, folks, that is emotional cushioning. You've got 4 steps, right? Compassion, 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 which is always the first step. Number 2, find neutral thoughts. Number 3 is paper thinking. And number 4 is equal airtime. So I hope this was helpful. If there is any questions or concerns or topics that you would love for me to cover, reach out to me on social media. You can find me on Instagram or Facebook at IVF This Coaching. You can also email me directly at hello@IVF This Coaching. I would love to hear from you, and I hope you have a beautiful day, my friends. Take care. I adore you, and you've got this. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard and want to learn more, head over to ivfthiscoaching.com. That's www.ivfthiscoaching.com.